Welcome to September's NEFA Fireside Chat. I am joined today by Andrew Alper, attorney at Franzel, Robbins, Bloom, and Chateau, and Shervin Rashti, CEO of Slim Capital. Thanks for joining me, guys.
Thanks for having us, Jesse.
And
We're
we are
ready
here.
for the fun.
Ready for the fun? Well, fun. Let's talk disclosure laws, because that's always fun. And I know they've been a topic of conversation for a while. We're taking a little different twist to this one here, as we want Andy to kind of discuss the laws and what they mean to businesses, primarily right now in the state of California. Fingers crossed that hopefully it just stays there, but unlikely. And then we're going to have a business take on it with Shervin, as his company is located in Orange County. So this is a direct impact to Shervin's day-to-day business. So
These palm trees are Beverly Hills palm trees, and we have an office in Orange County. So our headquarters is here.
I apologize for that. I made that mistake. I was going to say, for the sake of disclosure law, maybe you could say we're in Arizona, because we have palm trees here too. So I don't know if it's too soon to go into some of that stuff or not. So Andy, at a high level, these disclosure laws and what they mean, what do they mean to businesses like Shervin's?
Well, nothing means anything to Shervin's business. I mean, he's going to do what he's going to do no matter what. But
I guess we're starting off right off the bat.
All right, you took off the gloves already, Andy. Let's go.
In September of 2018, California passed their disclosure laws, and the whole idea behind the disclosure laws was to make lenders disclose interest rates and costs and fees, and to allow a prospective borrower to shop them. And so there would be more, more disclosure of what's in the documents, rather than once the documents are slapped in front of the borrower, that he'd just have to sign and wouldn't necessarily read them, and wouldn't necessarily know what the terms are, and wouldn't know whether or not there are better deals out there. So that was the whole impetus behind these disclosure laws, is to make it more transparent for borrowers.
Got it. I just think of some of those different, as you're going through like a car buying process or some of that other stuff. I know it's not really applicable here, but on the consumer side, like, who reads all that stuff? Like every single page. I just want to get to the finances and figure out what's the best price.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's always, how long do I pay? How much do I pay? Is there a residual at the end? And all that boilerplate stuff in the middle. Well, who cares, right? That's kind of what happens in the normal small to mid-sized transactions out there. Obviously, the larger the deal, the more things get read and the more things get negotiated.
So I guess to that point, like, who is impacted by this? Like, who has to abide by these new disclosure laws?
So these disclosure laws are different in California than, say, New York, because
Okay.
New York also is in the process of finalizing its disclosure law. The folks who are impacted are any borrowers, and by the way, under the disclosure law, a borrower is called a recipient. Under the disclosure law, the lender who's providing the offer is the provider. So now you're using the terms of provider and a recipient for this law. But any recipient who is going to have a loan of $500,000 or less, that is principally managed or directed from California. So if in fact, your principal place of business is in the great state of Arizona, and maybe you're just using equipment or have a branch office in California, those would not be applicable to you, because you're principally directed or managed from Arizona, not California. If the loan is going to be more than $500,000, then it's also not applicable to that borrower, because that's what the law, that's the limitation on the law. However, in New York, that number's $2,500,000.
Of course.
That's not going to change. That's, New York is up the ante. And so it's going to be more applicable to everyone else. Now, there are exemptions for those who qualify for exemptions, that they don't have to provide these disclosures. Exemptions include true leases. So everybody says, well, what's a true lease? Well, a true lease has a meaningful residual value at the end of the lease term. So if in fact it's, at least in California, more than 10%, that is considered to be a real lease. And it's not just a disguised loan, because at least 2 courts here in California have held that 10% is enough. Now, I know that might be a little low of a threshold in other states, but in California, that's what we're looking at. Also, fair market value transactions are typically true leases, where you can acquire the equipment for fair market value at the end of the lease term. That would be the case in, like 95% of the leases, that nobody's ever going to look behind a fair market value lease, and it'll be true lease. However, the more extreme kinds of examples could be if you're leasing a computer for 10 years, there is no value at the end of the lease term.
Say for
In fact,
2 years.
you have to pay to get rid of it on the waste recycling. So, that's not really a true lease. And so in those kinds of situations, I would probably be giving disclosures, even though the chances of somebody coming back at you on a fair market value lease are pretty slim. Likewise, in California, track leases that have the terminal rental adjustment clauses are also considered to be true leases. So anybody who's got a lease, since it's not a loan, doesn't have to give disclosures. If there's a depository bank in California, they too are exempt from giving disclosures. But that also includes things like credit unions and savings and loans associations as well. So they're exempt. If the loan is secured by real property, it's exempt. And there are certain kinds of things, like under the Farm Credit Act, certain motor vehicle dealers are exempt. And then there is an exemption if you only make one loan within a 12-month period in California, or 5 loans that are incidental to your business in California within a 12-month period. Now, what does incidental to your business mean? It'd be nice if they told us, but I'll give you my example that I like to use, and we'll just assume that there's no such thing as a John Deere credit, but John Deere sells a tractor. The borrower says, well, look, I can't pay for it. Will you make me a loan? John Deere's business isn't making the loans, it's selling the tractors. So making 5 of those loans within 1 year, within the 12 months, that would be incidental to their business. Anyway, that's my example of what I think that means. So those are various exemptions where you don't have to provide those disclosures.
Got it. So Shervin, these disclosure laws, like, just on the surface, I mean, man, like, what's that mean to you and your business?
Well, we're going to need to make some adjustments, and those adjustments are going to come in the way, because we deal a lot with third-party originators that send us deals. It poses a bit of a threat with respect to tripwires, because they're customer facing, and we have to be the ones that have to ultimately take the fall if something's not done correctly. So that's going to cause us to make extra efforts to ensure that some of those items are handled. So just taking a typical flow of a deal that comes in, from before we even see the deal, there have been discussions between the borrower or the recipient, I guess, and the
Some kind of rate,
intermediary.
some kind of rate card, some kind of scorecard. I mean, they know it where they should fall in.
Something. So if you're just practically speaking about this, you're saying they have to ask the right questions, they have to assess the situation, they have to determine what a good home would be for the deal, and present some kind of uh, at least basic guidelines of where they think things are going to fall. And that therein lies some of the issues. So that's where we are looking at imposing some of the disclosure requirements upon the credit decision, right? So at least at the point where there's an offer, and Andy and I have had many discussions about this. We've presented on several panels, and so we have this kind of understanding that we've come to we've come to learn that there is a way to have a delineation, right, of at what point do the disclosures actually become relevant to this discussion. I think there's one, so one of the things we're going to look to do is once we put out approval terms. Right now, we just put out approval terms and say, okay, if you want a term sheet, let us know. Great. That those approval terms will have a little bit more in our system. So everything systems and processes have to modify. So when we speak practically, we have to make those adjustments to ensure that there are those modifications. For example, having a void date, right, on the disclosure. That's something that Andy brought up, is we're in a rising rate environment. We have to be sure that we're protecting ourselves from additional increases as they're coming. September 21st, I think, is the next one, to avoid those pitfalls. And then also to make sure that whatever the final structure of those disclosures are actually signed and returned to us. It's going to create some challenges for the originators, because there's a lot of discussion and negotiation in the commercial world that is really unrelated to just the factors that they've brought to light. And I think that's where it's creating this universal blanket over consumers and MCAs and leasing and everything else has to have these disclosure laws, whereas the old leasing world is based on I have an opportunity cost. I have an opportunity that's going to gain a return that far outweighs the cost of capital. And that becomes something that is very relevant with these business owners, recipients, lessees, right? Because they know that if they buy a $200,000 excavator, they're going to have, and their payment is $5,000 a month, that their income, and they tell you this, they're going to earn $25,000, $30,000 a month just off of that one unit. So whether they get it or not, whether the cost is 5,000 or 5,200, that's where it kind of takes that part of the discussion away, and it gets into these recipients' heads in a way. And I'm changing nomenclature quickly for you, Andy, so I hope you appreciate it. But we serve a broad spectrum of clients, right? So we have what I call the credit spectrum, and then we go all the way down to the more collateral-driven, structured transactions. I think with the collateral and structured transactions, there's a little bit more give and leeway. They understand that rate's not really the pressing issue, and with the documentation that goes out with DocuSign, it's a very quick turnaround. And generally speaking, they're anxious to get the equipment. And so it becomes less of a pressing issue, because the fact that they're qualified and they have a deal to get the equipment is more important. When we're talking about our credit-based side of the spectrum, that's going to be a more pricing, rate sensitive. Give me those details. Let's walk through it. I mean, we've had grinding on quarter basis points. It goes all up and down, and it's a little bit of a disadvantage to the originators versus banks, right? So a bank might come in, they could do as they wish, they're exempt, no issues.
Yeah.
And now this originator's put in the time, the effort, the money, brought in this deal, gotten all the information, and now any amount, in my opinion, that they have to divulge that they're earning becomes too much, because like some clients just can't get it out of their head, right? It's like you're going, the package deal makes total sense, but if you start to now break it apart, it's going to become a challenge, right? Like, wait a second, you didn't do, this much
Why?
work.
Why are you charging me $5,000 as a fee when I can get 3,500 over here? And it's like, it's the same payment, man. But it's that, yeah, I could see that.
Right. So I think as we look at the implementation and the rollout, we haven't made any hard and fast decisions yet, because we're kind of, it's funny because I'm constantly having these discussions with conferences and board meetings and this and that, just trying to say, how are we going to use best practices as a community of lenders in this world to make this a more level playing field? And people could make decisions to say, well, I'm only going to write leases. That's one option. I'm not going to work in California. I think that's less of an option, because as you'll find out further, more and more states are coming. And I made the analogy earlier. It's like the mouse in the cage that is let out, and they're always going to find the same way regardless of what route they take through the maze. So that's, I think what's going to end up happening is we all are going to have to eventually take some of this and put it in effect.
Well, one of the things that kind of comes to my mind, thank you for kind of giving your insight there. A lot of the transactions under 500K are pretty quick. Like, you need to be quick in your decision making process. You have to have that really automated front end. And I think of what this means from a software perspective, coming from that world. Now you have to go in and you have to build one more step in that process. It's going to take more time, going to frustrate people. So I don't know what you guys think of that.
Well, and it's not easy. I use a lot of technology to leverage the amount of volume that we could use. The issue is no two transactions are alike, right? You might have step payments, step up payments, step down payments. How now you have to put these into an AM schedule. How is the rate then calculated? What is the total payback over time? Like, there are a lot of things, nuances that are going to go into modifying this. But yes, absolutely, there's going to be some capital expenditures and time and learning curve to implement this properly.
So Andy, from a legal perspective, I guess what this is recording and it's going to go on NEFA's website. So what free advice can you offer organizations like Shervin?
I can't offer anything for free.
I know that.
I walked my way into that comment, but
let me. I want to kind of step back a few moments and talk about what these disclosures are supposed to look like and when they're to be presented, because that kind of goes into what Shervin was talking about with respect to the systems that he's going to have to work with. Disclosures must be presented and signed before any lease or loan documents are signed. And my feeling about that is, don't give me a package with the offer summary on top and then all the other documents, after that. Because what choice does somebody really have if they have to sign that offer summary at the same time? The whole idea behind the disclosures was so they can go out and review it and talk to their accountants or lawyers and go shop it. And if you're giving it to them at the same time, while technically it might be allowed, I can see the unfair business practices complaint and the unconscionability issues and the fraud and everything else that's going to be alleged. So my feeling is the first thing that goes out to anybody is, what they call the offer summary, because that's what it is called. The regulations that deal with the disclosures, that, by the way, for all you regulation nerds out there in the audience, both of you, it's, the California Code of Regulations, 900 through 956. And what is in those regulations, you have a very specific way you have to present this offer sheet. And the offer sheet is in columns, and the columns are regulated. The font size is regulated. The amount of language can't exceed any explanation over 60 words. At the bottom of the offer sheet, you have to have some language that's required. And then after the offer sheet, you have to provide a document called itemization of funds. Now, the offer sheet itself, they tell you what's to be in it, but they don't give you like a safe harbor form, which would be wonderful if you have a form that says you follow this form and you're in like Flint, no problem. But they don't. The itemization of funds, on the other hand, there is a form. So you follow that. And that itemization of funds is not something that people in the small ticket world and the mid ticket world are used to, because you got to disclose all the fees that are part of it. You got to disclose your broker's fees, inspection fees, UCC fees, anything that's being appraisal fees, anything that's being taken out. It's got to go into this itemization of funds. They have to say who gets what. So there are times where the recipient or borrower doesn't get all the money. Some of it goes to or most of it might go to a supplier or vendor, but there might be a little bit of working capital in there as well. So you have to disclose all that stuff. Okay. So you have to give them the offer summary form, the disclosure form, before any documents are actually handed to them that comply with it.
So Andy, could I'm going to go back a step. Sorry, because we put out to our originators through the system terms, but we give options. We give different term lengths, we give different down payment options, we might give different point structures, we might even give lease versus EFA structures. We give all of the different flavors that from which they could choose. Can we still do that part until they come back and say, okay, let's go with the 60-month EFA? That's what we want. And then we put it out for signature.
I think what you're doing is you're just shopping with them. You have to ask them what they want, but there's nothing wrong with multiple offer summaries out at the same time. And then the one they sign is the one you're going to dock.
So that means you just have to add that means you have to add all the fees and everything to every one of those offer summaries, it sounds like.
That's what you're going to do. Now, what I think, whether it's a broker-driven transaction or not, and brokers have certain duties and responsibilities here too, I think what you need to do is say, okay, customer, what do you want from us? What are you looking for? I'll do the best I can to try and find you something, but I can't make you any kind of proposals or offers, until such time as there's an actual written offer summary given to you.
But if you go that route, if I'm the customer, I'm going to be like, I want the best deal for the best price.
Right. That's I mean, part of it just, I understand what the legislators have done, and I understand on the legal side trying to enforce those. But then there's me, there's us, there's the folks that are listening in on this. There's the practical side saying, I need to have an open conversation with these guys, a dialogue, so that I could say, hey, this is where you're going to fall on this. This is where you're going to fall on that. Let me know, and then we'll give you the final thing. I think I don't think it's a very realistic expectation to say, I'm going to send out, 12 different versions of a document, choose one. I think that's arguably more challenging than for them to say, no, you know what, I'd rather have a shorter term so that I could have less out of pocket. That sounds about right. Can you write it up for me? That happens every single day. That happens when you go to the car dealership, as Jesse says. I just refined my mortgage, did it all on the phone, and then of course all the disclosures come. So I don't see how that's going to be any different. It can't be more overwhelming or than the consumer world.
Well, it can't be more overwhelming than the consumer world. But just the same, you don't want to get stuck in a proposal that's been made that is different than either your offer summary or the ultimate documents, because that's where you're going to get into trouble. And I can, look, we've seen a lot of litigation in my millions of years of practice of law. When I started with the dinosaurs, it was any oral representation all of a sudden became an agreement. Any
Well,
proposal that was made becomes
that
an
was my
agreement.
comment, Andy. Was like, what if you're just sitting there spitballing some numbers? Is
You're,
that
you're
like,
potentially causing a problem. And I'll tell you right now, if it's a broker transaction and the broker's doing that, that's even more problematic. If it's your salesperson that's doing it, it's better. But brokers aren't supposed to do anything other than gather information, go to the lender or the provider, and then the provider gives the offer sheet, and the broker can't touch it, can't deal with it. All he can do is present it and then get it signed and then send it back. That's it. All the brokers can do in this world. So they have to be able to try and say, look, what do you want? And if I'm a broker, when, says, okay, here's what we talked about. I'm not making you any offers right now. I will see what I can do for you.
That's fine.
That's kind of about it. That's about it.
But there has to be no one's going to stay on the phone, including any of us who have purchased anything and financed anything in our lives, if we don't hear something tangible before we proceed. I mean, that's the reality of it. I'm sorry. This will have to play its course out. It might be litigated at some point, and Andy, that's your job to fight. I'm sorry. I'll put it on you.
See, that's why I'm not free. In any event, what ultimately, and because I want to kind of finish up my thought process because we didn't get it in. What's in the disclosures? Everybody wants to know, well, how do I do them? What's in there? Again, you've got to have columns, and you have to have explanations, and you have to have numbers. So the first column is going to be the total amount of the commercial financing and, how the funds are directed. The second column is going to be the finance charge. The third column will be the APR. And the APR is calculated just like consumer law. It's under the Truth in Lending Act, which is found in Regulation Z 12 Code of Federal Regulations, Section 1026.
Okay.
All right, it's there, and it's ridiculous because you can't read it. But that's why I'm a lawyer and not an accountant. The term of the financing is in the next column. The total repayment amount, which is the disbursement you make, plus the finance charges in the next column. And, there's a different calculation that you do if it's fixed payments versus variable payments. That has to be in that same fifth column. And then the last column are the prepayment penalties. And then at the bottom of this offer sheet, I'll read you the magic language real quickly. Applicable law requires the information to be provided to you to help you make an informed decision. By signing below, you are confirming that you receive this information. and then you have a signature line and the date. And then following that is that separate itemization of funds that's got a bunch of columns, and you go through that as to how the funds are distributed. So that's what your offer summary looks like. And it's quite complex. Now, there are 7 different kinds of offer summaries, depending upon the transactions. Most everybody will be doing closed loans, closed-end loans. That's the normal EFA that you get. You advance money, and that's how much it is. But then you also have lease financing, which is the non-true leases, the dollar purchase options, the 101s, the puts, those kinds of things. Then you have a different form if it's an open-ended credit line. Then you have a different form if you're a factor or you're doing asset-based lending. And then there's something that's called sales-based financing, where most of the folks in this industry, I don't think, do this, but it's where the amounts that are due are based upon how much is sold.
Kind of like the copy machine model, maybe. What you use, you pay.
Yeah, well, you pay per copy and that kind of thing. Yeah, to me, it's more like if you're leasing real property and your rent is based on gross proceeds,
yeah.
gross sales,
sure.
It's more like one of those things.
Yeah.
And then the last form is other. So anything that isn't covered there is covered in another form. And each of the forms has different stuff that you put in, but it's generally following that same format of what's in there. And I have prepared a couple of the forms for clients, and I keep learning as I do these forms for clients, and we talk about things, and I said, hey, you know what? I think there's a couple more things I want to put in my form. Even though it's not part of what's required under the law. One of them was what Shervin said earlier about cost of funds. One of the concerns I had is, well, wait a minute, I'm giving somebody an offer, but I'm just leaving it out there. I got to have a termination date because my cost of funds is going to change. So you should say, this offer is only valid for X days, and then it's void. So it's not out there forever because you may not be able to do that deal any longer. A second thing that I want to put out there is that, hey, this is a proposal. This is my proposal to you, but it doesn't contain every term of my loan or lease documents. And therefore, you acknowledge and agree by signing below that there are additional terms other than are set forth in this offer sheet. So those are 2 things that I've kind of included in my forms now. And again, we're all learning as to what these things are going to look like and how they're going to play.
Andy, I have a question. Thank you, Andy. Question. The second column, finance charge. What's in there? Broker fees are in there. Total interest component, I guess, is in there. And so how is the broker fee carved out?
Okay, so in the finance charge, what you do is you explain the calculation of the finance charge with the amount and description of each expense included in the finance charge. And again, you've only got the 60 words to do that.
Okay. So there's some work to be done.
And
what about on the broker agreements, the referral agreements? What would you recommend changing in there, if anything?
So as much as I would have liked to have done like a standard language in a broker agreement, I did one of these the other day for a bank. And the reason that we were doing these for the bank is that the bank buys paper. So they need to make certain that the broker, who's now supposed to have been the provider, has done what they're supposed to do under the law. So what I did is I provided a California addendum to their standard broker agreements that had the brokers making various representations and warranties, regarding that, they haven't said anything outside of what's in, their offer sheet. They haven't said anything outside, the loan documents. They've complied with everything they've needed to do, etc. I mean, the whole bunch of stuff. But I did a California addendum. Now, obviously, if they weren't a bank, then it would be a different addendum because they're exempt. So if they're making loans, it's not a problem. If a broker gives them a loan to do, not a problem for the bank because there's no disclosures needed. It's their loan, they're the provider. If
But
the broker has actually entered into a loan, that's where the bank has an issue.
so
Now, for you who's not a bank, you're going to need additional disclosures that they've complied with the disclosure law. So, I mean, for example, one of those things that a broker has to do is he has to retain the disclosures they're given for 4 years.
But what if a broker doesn't know if it's going to go to an independent or a bank?
Yeah.
Yeah, but the fact is that any offer sheet that's being given is going to be given by one or the other. And what you're talking about is the broker agreement. So the brokers may be signing agreements now with the independent and with the bank that might be a little different, depending upon who they're going to send work to, or maybe
because if I'm a broker and I don't want to disclose my broker fee, I'm going to be shopping my business to banks because in theory they're going to have better rates anyways. So, and I don't have to disclose my fee.
But that means it has to be on bank paper too.
Correct.
And okay, so that takes away folks that are packaging or selling or discounting or any of that stuff too, even though they're dealing with banks, right?
Well, but if they're discounting, then it's on their paper, and so they should be making certain reps and warranties regarding the deal to the buyer, and so those agreements can say that.
So what if you're just collecting a couple months of interim and then you're going to sell it to a bank, but it's on your paper originally?
Well, you're the provider. You provided the money.
Need to have it. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, it's before everybody asks the question, bank subsidiaries are not depository banks for the purpose of this law. They do not get the exemption. There's a lot of financial institutions that have been recently sold to banks.
Right.
You can think of a bunch of them right now.
Okay.
If they do not become a division so that they're now part of the bank and they retain their own corporate or LLC entity, but the bank just owns their stock or their members' interests, they're a wholly owned subsidiary, and therefore they're not a depository bank, and therefore they're not exempt from having to give the disclosures.
So Andy and Shervin, I guess, takeaways from people watching or listening to this, podcast here. What recommendations, what recommendations, Andy, do you have for people besides just calling you up and putting you on retainer? Got to do a little sales pitch here. And then from a Shervin perspective, are you in a wait and see mode, or how proactive are you going to be on this?
Well, I don't know. That retainer thing isn't a bad idea. I
had to suffer through an hour of being on a thing with Jesse. I get something, right?
That's right. No, the workaround is
and you said the word, just so you know. I did not ask for a workaround. The attorney put it out there. Okay.
I mean, obviously, if you're entering into true leases, then you don't have any issues at all. There is a potential issue that I don't really want to discuss right now with a broker working with an exempt lender like a bank, because that kind of implicates the California financial financing law stuff. Is whether or not brokers can work with anybody other than licensees. So that's a different issue for another day. And if I say that, now I'll get a lot of good calls. But in any event, I think that obviously there are some advantages in finding a lender that is not that is either exempt from doing the disclosures. You don't have to, especially because no one wants to disclose, fees if they don't have to. I mean, isn't that one of the two major reasons why the equipment finance agreement was originated? It's so that you can just say, 60 payments of, $5,000 a month, for, and that's it, and you're done, and you're not like a note that says, well, the interest rate is X and, whatever. That's one of the reasons why. But the other reason was, okay, well, the EFA is one document. You don't need a note in the security agreement. You got them both in one document. But I really think it's, kind of the non-disclosure reason why the equipment finance agreement was formed. So it's going to kind of take the luster off of that. It may take the luster off of a lot of private label transactions as well. Because there'll be more disclosures in those, on those deals. And
well, unless you just create a private label that only does 4 new deals a year.
There you go. In California.
In California.
You do them elsewhere.
Over and over and over again.
All over and over again. Do deals more than $500,000. Then you don't have to worry about them either.
500,001.
500,000 1 penny. And I mean, those are some of the things you can do. Or you just do them. It's just, you just do them. It's a fact of life. We always tend to, learn how to do things we don't want to do, and we do them.
And Shervin, I guess just what are your thoughts here, man?
So change is always strange, and it does take adjustment and preparation. I think as long as we've been hearing about this, it's going on 4 years now. It's been nervous anticipation, but no real reality. And obviously, when we got the notice that it's now here and real, it becomes something that we have to address. So we are now looking at implementing it, just doing it, as Andy says, and then also offering options where we could write leases. And obviously some folks are not very big on leases because of the residual. Generally, that's the biggest issue. We're going to qualify leases and just take some residual risk, I think, is what we'll look at doing, by writing, term residuals and things of that nature that still give our originators and the clients the ability to make these streamlined and painless, and just keep it out there for us a little bit. So I think that's one of the ways that I'm really leaning towards, making life easy, but then also having options.
And for my, like, an implementation standpoint, I'm curious to see how this gets implemented across the board, because we can go down a totally separate rabbit hole with the 1071 stuff, but that stuff's coming too. And it sounds to me like it's kind of similar, where it's like, how's that going to be implemented? But that's a totally other conversation.
One thing at a time. One thing at a time. We'll book another hour for that, I guess.
There we go.
All right, guys. Well, I appreciate your time today. I'll throw both of your contacts out if you guys don't know who Shervin and Andy are, so you can reach out to them directly. Andy's going to offer a discount on his lawyer services for those people who mention it, maybe. But anyhow, appreciate your time, guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Jesse.